All right, for those of you that have not been here the last couple of weeks, I've been dealing with a topic called Life as a Stage, Christ Consciousness in the Age of Grace. And rather than take the time to actually review everything that I've gone over in the last 2 weeks, you can go to my personal website, hillebrecht.com. On the front of that face page there is video teaching, Life as a Stage. It's the slideshow and narration from last week. It's all there, so you can go over it, okay? Today I'm just going to hit the high points and then advance, because we got a lot to cover, a lot of ground to cover in trying to bring some sense of closure to where I've been going with this. This lesson starts out with this passage from the Gospel of Peter. In his closing was, "But grow in grace and the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. To him be glory both now and forevermore." There's that word again, Ted. As a plug, if you guys have not been coming to Wednesday's sessions, man, you should have been there last Wednesday. It was a barn burner. Yeah. Still smoking on that one. All right. Grow in grace. That's kind of where we've been looking at. Everybody grows. Some of us do it intentionally, though. And this message is basically being learned, teaching us or giving us awareness about how we grow. What are the steps that we go through? What are the various levels, stages that each of us transverse as we're going through things? Spirituality in the West, by and large, has been stuck with structures. Okay? It really has. While spirituality in the East has been dealing a lot with what you'd call states or relationships. That's kind of what they deal with most frequently. They don't have a lot of structure in how they do things. They don't have rules and regulations to tell you how to do it. They just expect you to be able to go into the relationship. Okay? On the West, on the other hand, they're more geared towards making sure that everything is properly followed. All the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. This is what you have to do to make sure it works, okay? And, as Ted started out today saying that we haven't moved into Eastern, spirituality, I'm still not going that direction. I'm just pinpointing stuff. We're dealing a lot with what I call ladders and maps. So we get an understanding of how all of this operates. One of the questions that we're confronted with is, how do you track your spiritual development? Okay, how do you determine whether or not you're growing? I mean, what's the metric you're using? And so this is where the ladder thing comes in. In the last 2 weeks, unfortunately, those of you that are new here this week, you don't get the opportunity to see me balance on a ladder this week. So just imagine that there's a ladder here, and then we'll work from there. Okay, but the last 2 weeks, we had a nice balancing act up here with ladders and everything, and it really made an impact. How do our lives, the events in our life occur? Well, we have two ways of being able to look at the way things happen to us in life. We are either looking at it through stages, okay, or levels. There's things that we do. We progress through things. Children grow in stages. There's certain types of events that occur to everybody. I mean, you can't miss it. We all go through a stage. I mean, obviously, your mother has said that about you. It's just a stage you're going through, okay? So obviously, they know something that we are now still learning. The other things is we go through states, or what I call the maps, and they're momentary. You've had an experience, not necessarily in church, but out living life. Suddenly you have this intense spiritual experience that happens to you. You know for a fact that somehow you met God and that he spoke to you, and it stuck. And it was momentary, but it had a lasting impact. It was something that gave you an indication of what the terrain is that you're involved in or where you're headed. Those maps are not levels. Those maps are not stages. They're windows into where you're going. And that's what's important to understand, because a lot of people think that those experiences are the be-all and end-all, but they don't realize that you're still growing up into those things. So let's take a look at our basic consciousness. This is how everybody goes through this. We go through our very basic first level of consciousness is egocentric. It's thinking solely about ourselves. Everything is focused on us. I mean, this comes at you from a child's perspective. When you're born, it's all about you, okay? And you stay that way. That's the consciousness that we have when we are in a protective mode, when we're in a hostile environment, when we're in an area that is unfamiliar to us. We all go egocentric. We all go thinking about us. How is this going to affect us? How am I going to proceed from here? You know, how am I going to get my needs met? From that spot, we then will move into an ethnocentric. Okay, in normal childhood, this happens to an individual probably when they're about 3 to 5. They start thinking about other people. They start seeing that there's another person that's going to be associated with them. It's their friends, their buddies. And as they grow into adolescence, they get to group around those individuals. But the thing about that in that sense, at that time of life, is that even though they're thinking about someone else, it's still associated with you. Okay? Those friends are not out there. It's about you and your friends. It's not your friends and you. It's you and your friends. So it's still egocentric. As you move further into this, you also get into an issue of start looking at world-centric. Now you start looking at them, those that are out there. And regrettably, a lot of the out there thinking about others is still egocentric because it's us versus them. Okay? So, this is the way that we all develop. This is the way we all go. It's just normal. Now, I brought this example in, again. These are the, throughout the 2,000 years that the church has been around, the last 150 to 200 years, science and the development of understanding the personality and how a person develops, the science of personal development, has come up with these various models to describe how a person goes through the stages of life. These are generic descriptions. They're pretty common, and it pulls from, this model here, this representation here, pulls from about 70 different specialists across that 150 to 200 year time frame. So these names that appear here, they might seem a little arbitrary, but they're not, because they're very specific in how each person or each developmentalist has looked at that stage. And this is how the things describe it. And I've gone through, actually, this process of trying to describe these things. The steps for development that are described here, that I've listed levels of spirituality, are also the same levels that you as an individual develop personally. They're tied together and they work in the same thing. So to kind of make things concise, I've pulled them together into this one slide. We have these two tiers that I want to stress, because we haven't, even to this point where I am here in this third teaching, have not reached the second tier yet. Okay? So we're still trying to get forward. There is a second tier and a third tier of spirituality. Now, I'm not going to back up. Neil, who's the little blob that's up there, he comes in and represents really where about 70% of the world is at right now in their spiritual development. That's where they're at. That's where all the church is at. Most of the communities in the world are sitting somewhere in the vicinity of a mythical, magical realm. There's little spatterings of it up in the rationality realm, but that's about it. Okay? Now, this is just not some arbitrary thing. These are people that have actually gone out and talked with one of the 7 billion people that are out there to find out where you're at. Okay, so this is not just me saying this. This is people saying this is where they have found through their questioning and their surveys to determine what the level of each person is. That doesn't mean that those other levels above that don't exist. There are people that do exist in those other levels, but the majority are sitting right where this guy's at. So, last week I introduced spiral dynamics as another model. And I'm going to use it because it gives us a little bit bigger description on some of the things that we were going into. It too has various colors that were represented. So I'm going to kind of mix the two of them together here as we go through the rest of this discussion so we understand how all this works. And spiral dynamics, the reason I'm employing it is because this particular gentleman, Claire Graves, who developed this, he was a psychologist back in the 50s and 60s, or psychiatrist, excuse me. He came up with this model that goes through and represents or looks at people across broad stretches of things, and his study was dealing with the values of an individual. So this is really a value model. They look at how they're establishing what they're doing. So this is the fourth level that he's got in here. It's called his conformist, and this is the one that is the mythic level in my previous example, the previous model. But the text here is really neat, but I'm going to go through this so you understand. When you're at this particular level, according to his model, life has a meaning, a direction, a purpose, and an outcome. It's determined by an all-powerful other or order. The righteous order enforces a code of conduct based on the absolutist and unvarying principles of right and wrong. Violating the code or rules has severe, perhaps everlasting repercussions. Following the code yields rewards for the faithful. It's the basis for ancient nations, rigid social hierarchies, paternalistic. One right way and only one right way to think about everything. Law and order, impulsivity controlled through guilt. Concrete, literal, and fundamentalist beliefs, obedience to the rules of order, often religious in mythic membership sense, but can be secular or atheistic. Go down the corner of every street and you'll find that's where those people are. Because that's what the description is for church. That's how they fall. You'll follow the law, you'll follow the way we do it, you'll follow our dogma. Okay, you'll follow our doctrine. These are how we have always done things. Now the dilemma, remember, I said, when Neil came onto the screen, that's where the majority of the people are at. That is at this level up here. I'm going to use this as this is the level that the church is at right here. Okay? They're stuck at this level. They have been for 2,000 years. They don't move. Because in this level, they can control how you think. Okay? Because beyond this level is an individual who has the sense to think things through, to go beyond. This is groupthink. Okay? But it's controlled by a set of standards that everybody must follow, and if you don't dress right, or you don't speak right, you don't look right, present yourself right, worship right, whatever it is, you are looked at in such a way that you're going to feel guilt and shame for being out of the, quote, norm. Okay? Now, we've all experienced it in a number of different venues. It doesn't necessarily have to be church. Okay? It can be in corporate status. Okay? In the corporate world, we can find that. You can find it in Little League Baseball, for crying out loud. Okay? This is how we do things. This is how it's always got to be done. You know, it can be anything. But that's what this level or this place is at. They put a high value on making sure that people stay in line. There's nothing wrong with that until you get to the point where you can't move beyond it. Okay? This is where I left you last week. Because this is the scripture that they will pull against you when you're in a church. Okay? If you're going to try to get out of the thinking, the herd mentality of a church environment, they're going to pull this on you and say, okay, well, you know, there's a way that seems right to a man. In other words, they're telling you, you're thinking too much. Okay? Don't go down that slippery slope, you know. You'll never be able to get there. Okay, yeah. So, where is it that you're leading to? What's the next stage, the next level that we're headed towards in doing that? That's the rational attitude. Okay, or altitude, excuse me. I use the word altitude in here for a simple reason, rather than a level, because, you know, if we were as a group, let's say all of us here are going to go climb Mount Hood. That's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to strategically surround it and then all go up and ascend and meet at the top. Okay? As we go up that mountain, our view, how we go up it individually, will be different for each person. The height will be the same as we go up, but the view from where we're each at will appear differently. So when we reach the top and we try to describe what our ascent was like, we're going to have different pictures or representations. But the altitude demarcations as we go up that will all be common. We'll all run out of oxygen at about the same spot. Okay? we'll all start stripping off gear at the same spot because it's just too heavy to carry. Okay, the same things happen. So I'm using the word altitude in here to keep that in mind. Each of us is on a journey. We're all going up a hill. We're all going up a ladder or a stage, whatever you want to do. We're all doing the same thing. We're all ascending to a certain spot, but we're all traveling it in different ways. So we all have a different view of it. But we need to know what are the common things that the altitude has. So in the rational altitude, this is where you start thinking. This is where you break away from the herd mentality. This is where people start thinking for themselves. God, I hope you're thinking for yourself. This is the issue when you're developing kids, that they start questioning everything you've told them in the past. Well, why does this happen? Well, what about this? They start thinking. They start running with a whole different crowd of people, and because they start running with a different crowd of people, suddenly they're now got questions that they've never faced before, and they're going to bring them to you to get, is there order to this? What's going on? Can you explain this? Some parents shut down. No, you just do what I say. Some people allow that expansion to work. It's entirely up to you to decide how you want to navigate it. But they're growing. They're maturing. Same thing happens in your spiritual development. Okay? Spiritual development is something we personally choose to do. You're not born into it. You are born into it, but you're not born and then stay there. Okay, you make a decision. This is where I want to go. And then you advance at your own rate, your own time, at what you want to get to. And there's a point, especially if you get bound up in one of the blue people, okay, where you're going to sit there and say, well, wait a minute, I'm just going to sit here because I feel comfortable. I like order. I can't stand chaos because this is chaos. Having kids, teenagers, are chaos. Whoop, back up. That thing's really moving. Okay. Under the spiral dynamics, the term for this is scientific achievement. Now, this is the issue where science took over. This is where the Enlightenment period came into human history, is at this spot. Science broke out at this moment. And that's where you have the ability to question things, to rationally look at stuff, to go through what-if scenarios. At this point right in here, and I'm not going to go through and read all this thing because it's obvious what's going on, but I want to show you something. Last 2 weeks, I've been going through this thing that Ken Wilber says, it's called the Great Nest of Being. And this is where, throughout all the traditions, the great traditions that we have, things are broken down in the following way. You have, starting in the middle there, or starting first off with spirit, which is a non-dual spirit. Everything's created from that spot. You then have matter, and the associated science that occurs underneath that would be physics, and it goes through life, mind, soul, and spirit, each one of those elements. This depiction, as I have been using it in the last 2 weeks, is a classic description of how science, or the rational mind, has portrayed man's existence. Okay? It started with this little thing called spirit, and then immediately went to matter. Okay? We've been dealing with the physics of matter, the physics of things, dealing with life, and dealing with the mind. But notice that the soul and the spirit, those are the two elements that are not science. They're not science related. Okay? It's the things that, I guess for lack of a better term, have not been given up by the religious community. Now, the great traditions throughout the world have actually followed this pattern. Everything begins with spirit. Everything begins in the spirit. Our entire existence began in the spirit. Bible clearly states the fact that we were in him before the foundations of the world. So matter did not exist and we were in him. Before the world began, we were in the spirit. But then something happened. We evolved. And as we evolved, We then noticed that we had a soul. We then noticed that we had a mind and we had a life, and suddenly we mattered. And when we mattered, we forgot that we had a soul and a mind and a life and a spirit. Our thinking, our consciousness got clouded the minute we became matter. And in the great traditions, it's our responsibility to grow back into that mind that we've always had, to grow back into the spirit of who we've always been. And so we have to go through these various levels of progression, of realization, of consciousness to get back to where we always were. It does. So let's take a look at this next level after we get out of rational. This is the physiologic level. This is the third and highest mental level. This is the level where we look at world-centric thinking. This is where we start thinking about us and them, all the things that go into this. At this level, I mean, some of the examples you got in there obviously are Einstein and Shakespeare and Jefferson. But the growth issues is an important part here. At this level of an individual, as they're progressing, one of the things that will happen to them is they develop this, I've been there, I've done that, who cares? Okay? And they will also lose all sense of there being a purpose for God. They basically rationalize God away. So in that sense, once they do that, they try to compensate with, okay, there's got to be a meaning for life. So they start developing things to do in the world based on their own visions and their own logic. So you'll see a lot of the fact that they go through this process and start pushing their agenda. These are the things that we think ought to be done. Now, understand something about this particular level. You still haven't broken into second tier spirituality. Okay? You are at the top of the first tier. And because of the first tier, and because of all the levels that are below that, you're still egocentric. One of the things that's important about this particular level, this is the highest level you can achieve at first tier, but this also is the level that hates every level below it. Because they think that they are trying to take away their positions of power. They think they are trying to do things in the old way. In the spiral dynamics method, it looks like this. It's communitarian, human bonding, ecological sensitivity, networking. Excuse me for a moment while I get really, okay, touchy-feely for a moment. Some of you aren't like that, but I'm just going to go through these terms so you understand what I mean. Okay, so you can see it. The human spirit must be freed from greed, dogma, the divisiveness, feelings and caring, supersede cold rationality, cherishing of the earth, Gaia, life. They're against hierarchy. They establish lateral bonding and linking, permeable self, relational self, group intermeshing, emphasis in dialogue and relationships. If any of this sounds like a government office, let me know. Basis of collective communities. They freely choose affiliations based on shared sentiments. Reaches decisions through reconciliation and consensus. The downside is interminable processing and incapacity to reach decisions. They do have a refreshment of spirituality, though, bringing harmony and enriching human potential. They're strongly egalitarian, anti-hierarchical, pluralistic values, social construction of reality, diversity, multiculturalism, relativistic value systems, and world systems called pluralistic relativism. Subjective nonlinear thinking shows a great degree of effective warmth, sensitivity, and caring for Earth and its inhabitants. Gosh, don't you feel better for them? This is the green movement. This is the world vision, world logic movement. This is where you see it splattered across everything. Okay? And remember, it's still first tier spirituality. They do. Now, there's also another spot in this within the spiral dynamics is the integrative part. See, they still haven't moved out of it yet, but you got to understand this. Life is a kaleidoscope of natural hierarchies or holarchies. Systems and forms, flexibility, spontaneity, functionality with highest priorities. Differences and pluralities can be integrated into independent natural flows, except at Google. Egalitarianism is complemented with natural degrees of excellence where appropriate. Knowledge and competency should supersede rank, power, status, or group, except at Google. Prevailing world order is the result of the existence of different levels of reality and the inevitability patterns of movement up and down dynamic spiral. Good governance facilitates the emergence of entities through levels of increasing complexity. God, that's a mouthful. Okay, now these are levels in the dynamic realm. Notice in this particular one, there's not a percentage here for the population that are at it and how much power they have because it is so small. So small. People haven't advanced this far in many, many ways. Many of the major multinational corporations are just entering this particular level. Their corporate structure, their heads of those corporations, and the boards of directors are just starting to reach this level. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means it's just so faint you can't put it fully onto the radar. Now, what's important about that, I can't stress this enough. In any one of these levels that are advancing, we're getting into this advancement, you don't have to have a full amount of people adhering to this in order for the level or the stage to show up and to operate and to actually take over the entire community. The tipping point's at 10%. That's when everything just flips. Because once 10% of the population, not just the community, the world at large, once 10% of it reaches that level, the whole world suddenly becomes that. It suddenly enters that. Children that are born at that time are suddenly in that. They're at that level, they still have to go through all the other levels to get back to that level. But they enter in the community at that level. And so all of their thinking is back, they got to go through all these other stages. Now, the church is stuck. They won't go to another level. They stay here. And this is 4 levels above them. And they refuse to go any further. And they wonder, why in the world are we not having an impact in the world? This is the world. This is the world. They call themselves world changers. No, you're not. You're a hockey puck. You're being slapped around by everybody. You're not changing the world at all. If you want to be a world changer, you have to get level or above, and the church won't do it because it requires them to think. It requires them to address issues that the world is facing. All right, so here we are. We've gone through this development. We know that we've got these 3 levels of consciousness. We're egocentric, which is our basic nature. Ethnocentric, when we involve another individual. World-centric is when we start looking at employing other individuals. But in order for us to get into second-tier consciousness, we have to get into cosmocentric thinking. Okay? Because this is the level that you break through. Now, what's important about this, I can't stress this enough, everybody is sensing that something's going to happen. There's a big shift about to occur. They don't know what it is. They can sense that there's something on the horizon that this is about to overtake them, and they don't know really why. They can't put it together. They can't put it into words. It's a sense, it's a feeling. If you're at this top of the tier, the first tier at the very top, your next step up moves you into the second tier of spirituality. And the entire world is getting ready to move into the second tier, but they don't even know what it is. They don't recognize the fact that to move into that second tier is a quantum jump into spirituality. Let this consciousness be in you which was in Christ Jesus. You've all thought it said mind. It's your consciousness. Let this thought, let this perception, let this way of being able to perceive things be in you which was in Christ. Because this, him, his essence, his spirit is what's going to move you into the second tier. We've had states of Christ consciousness, but we've not had stages of Christ consciousness. And that's where the world's headed. We've looked at grace and said, well, I know grace is great. It's wonderful. I can live there. But you've had it as a state. Grace is the introduction to the second stage. It points to the direction and the place you're going. So the consciousness, the awareness that you need to have is that he has chosen us before him, before the foundations of the world. Again, that great nest of being starts out here in the spirit. You become aware. Suddenly you're aware of the fact that, oh, I was with him before this all happened. Your awareness shifts. There's a change in your perspective on how you relate to yourself. For we are his workmanship created in Christ, unto good works, which God hath ordained that we should walk in them. This is some of the awareness that we need to start looking at and developing. And you know what? This is what the world is going to jump into and not recognize what in the world it all means. They don't have an understanding of it. Suddenly, well, wait a minute. What's happening to me? Why is this happening to me? Because only 10% need to shift them. The question is, do you want to be the one that moves into integral attitude? In this altitude, the inner witness is the key to everything that you're in. And the reason it becomes the inner witness is because at the level before this, in the physiologic, towards the high end of that, you suddenly, because you've dismissed God, suddenly there's inner witnesses coming to you to say, well, wait a minute, maybe you ought to try this. So while they think they're working on their own vision and their own logic, actually what they're doing is they're working on the spirit that's within them, telling them how they should do things. And at this level right here, they suddenly become aware that there is a greater reliance and success rate in listening to the inner witness. I'll get to that in a moment, okay? Yeah. The other thing about this particular altitude is the fact that they integrate all the prior levels. At Vision Logic, they detested the prior levels because they did not feel that there was a need for any of them, because they were constantly pulling them back into the old ways, the old fashions. But at this level, you are starting to integrate and see that there are complementary things within each one of those levels that come into play wherever you're at, in whatever situation you're at. And so you start integrating the ability to be able to look at that. James Fowler wrote a landmark book called Stages of Faith. This is his description of this level. 2 pages, and I'm going to go through it and read it because you really need to understand. Stage 6, as he calls it, or the integral level, is exceedingly rare. The persons best described by it have generated faith compositions in which their felt sense of an ultimate environment is inclusive of all beings. They become incarnators and actualizers of the spirit of an inclusive and fulfilled community. They are contagious in the sense that they create zones of liberation from the social, political, economic, and ideological shackles we place and endure on human futurity. Living with felt participation in a power that unifies and transforms the world, universalizers are often experienced as subversive of the structures, including religious structures, by which we sustain our individual and corporate survival, security, and significance. There's more. Many persons in this stage 6 or individual, died at the hands of those they hope to change. Isn't that encouraging? Universalizers are often more honored and revered after death than during their lives. The rare persons who may be described by this stage have a special grace that makes them seem more lucid, more simple, and yet somehow more fully human than the rest of us. Their community is universal in extent. Peculiarities are cherished because they are vessels of the universal and thereby valuable apart from any utilitarian consideration. Life is both loved and held to loosely. Such persons are ready for fellowship with persons at any of the other stages and from any other faith tradition. That's the integral level that we're running into, that we don't understand. This is where Jesus was at. Okay? Buddha was there. Martin Luther King was there. Mother Teresa was there. I mean, you just go through the list of the people, the great saints that you had, the people that were high spiritual caliber, they were all at this particular level. Imagine an entire community at that level. Okay? This is a part of development that we can go to, that we can ascend to, because we want to. Spiral dynamics looks at it in this particular fashion. It's universalistic, holistic systems of integrated energies, unites feelings with knowledge, which is the centaur. Multiple levels interwoven into a conscious system. Universal order, but in a living conscious fashion, not based on external rules, which was the blue realm. Okay? Or group bonds, which is the green realm, which is the one right below the blue. It's a grand unification. Yeah, grand unification is possible in theory and in actuality. Sometimes involves the emergence of a new spirituality as a meshwork of all existence. Turquoise thinking uses the entire spiral, sees multiple levels of interactions, detects harmonics, the mystical forces, and the pervasive flow states that permeate any organization. That was their top. That was their sixth. That set them up for how things could be. That's the picture. It's a centaur. Okay? It's the melding of your animal nature with your human nature, where you have an ability to be able to integrate everything. And that's the key, it's integration. It's not accepting one over another. It's allowing all to have a voice. It's allowing everyone the opportunity to express that voice. And then, as a function of the state, or not the state, of the stage, allow integration to occur from those voices. Allow them to find harmony. And I know that's new agey and everything else that you get into that. Okay? And you can call it whatever you want. All right? But this is a matter of spiritual development, where you're moving from matter through life to your soul, to your mind, to the spirit. That's where you're trying to get back to, who you've always been.
So you want David or Ross Meach?
Anyone, any of them, okay? Well, any one of those levels can go to an extreme and do damage, okay? Every single one of them. If you're not constantly in a movement, you're stuck, and being stuck is going to put you in an extreme poverty. Think about it for a moment. Jesus said in the parable of the coin or the talents, take it from this man and take it from the lowest and give it to someone else. Okay? But the claim that comes after that is probably the most important one to realize. Anybody know what it is? Whatever you have will be taken from you and given to another. And what you don't have, even what you don't have, will still be taken from you. Okay? When you stop or stall, even what you have will be taken away from you. And you will stop growing. And you'll just stay in that place, right where you're at. Unwilling to change. Unwilling to go higher. Unwilling to open yourself to a possibility that there's something better. Now, throughout this whole entire process that I've gone through, I've been dealing with climbing, going higher. Well, Father Rohr last week had this beautiful little piece that kind of puts everything in perspective. I'll read it quickly to you. When Carl Jung was an old man, one of his students read John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and he asked Jung, "What has your pilgrimage really been?" Jung answered, "In my case, Pilgrim's Progress consisted in me having to climb down 1,000 ladders until I could reach out my hand to the little clod of earth that I am." The word human comes from the Latin humus, which means earth. Being human means acknowledging that we're made from the earth and will return to the earth. We are earth that has come to consciousness. For a few years, we dance around on the stage of life and have the chance to reflect a little bit of God's glory. As a human, I'm just a little moment of consciousness, a tiny part of creation, a particle that reflects only a fragment of God's love and beauty. And yet, that's enough. And then we return to where we started, in the heart of God. Everything in between is a school of love. You think that by climbing that you're ascending things. You're finding out who you are. But it's only when you descend that you find out really who you are. So while we have grown into these levels, we've grown to these stages, we've ascended the mount of God, only when you get to the top will you realize that you have to get rid of everything to find out who you are. You have to ascend to descend. And that's where we step into the next process of looking at states. How your state, how you interpret the existence around you, how you perceive it, relates to your development in spirituality. Stages are manifestations that everybody can see. We can all see it happening. We know where everybody's moving. States are personal. States are things that happen inside the heart. States are the things that reveal to you who you have always been. After you've stripped away all of the pretense and the false self and all the things that you've built up to be able to say who you are to a community that everybody can see, when you strip it all down and you become naked, to that level, that's when you have true spirituality, because then you stand face to face with God and realize just how accepted in grace you are. And that's where we go. Mike. Yes, Mike?
Sure, if you're going to have a relationship and help anybody, then you're just going to tell them to be a Sadducee or be a seeker of the gift that Christ died for and gave us. There's two different things. They're both, have the option of growing spiritually and not only in the state that you're explaining. So again, so let's just say they listen to you in this pursuit to get them into a spiritual state of being, but there's still answers that are missing.
Yep.
It's not just a seeking of a spiritual. You can actually be a fucking Darwinist, but at the same time you could be a Sadducee. At the same time you could be going the wrong way, but yet trying to reach your nirvana.
Yep.
Or you
Yep.
could be a big
Exactly.
Which one is the way? So it's leaving people without conclusion.
Exactly. And you know why that's leaving people without conclusion? Because you have a choice to make. But no, wait a minute. Listen. Here's the choice. The choice is that you can stay in duality, which is to look for a right and a wrong, or you can move towards non-duality, which has no right or wrong. It has being. That's the difference. And you as an individual in my life have an impact on what you say and do. And if I'm in a Sadducee frame of mind, okay, I would expect you to have the resources to say you're an idiot, just like Jesus did. Okay? And if I was way out there in some spiritual la-la land, I'd expect the exact same treatment. And the dilemma that we face is that we can't, until we have ascended to those particular realms of spirituality that are higher than where we are right now, and the realms that Jesus ascended to, because that's where the Christ consciousness is at, until we've reached that level, not worked from the works of ourselves in the level that we're at, but at the spiritual level that he's at, until we've reached that state of understanding, just as he presented it to us. Where do we go? Because these stages are here. They exist. The stages that I've been talking about are already displayed in the Bible. Every stage that I have talked about has a verse associated with it or a whole chapter associated with it. So this is not just something that's really out there, weird and spooky. What I'm saying is that if you can understand or be able to perceive the stages, you know where you're going. And the church doesn't look at the stage. They're stuck. And they don't understand it. And you are not under the law. Okay? So that means by understanding it, you're not under the law, you're already above the church. You've already ascended above that level. And being above that level gives you the opportunity to expand. Now, according to the list, I'm supposed to have a relationship thing here. According to the clock, I'm done. So, your assignment is to go out and have a relationship and find out where people are in their walk. What level do they think they're at? What are the hallmarks of where they are? And then find out how each of you plan on going up so you can go down. Because that's what's ahead of us. I'm not going to get up here and talk about, as Ted said, repentance and baptisms and all the things that go into this. And any church that wants to go beyond this level has to step away from that. A church's responsibility is to get a person to move. Not to go out in the community and try to help people and do all these things. It's to move them towards spirituality. It's to move them to God. It's to move them to their relationship. A church, as a unit, as a body, can't do that because it's a groupthink thing. You have to move towards God. You have to make the decision. You have to make the determination that this is where I want to go and this is what I'm after. Because it's important to me. It's important to my life. And when you reach that point and you come back into this building, the building stays the same, but the body changes. And unfortunately, a lot of the churches, you can't tell the difference between the